Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Wow. Dr. T. Colin Campbell, Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry at Cornell University, co-authored with his son, Dr. Thomas Campbell, the groundbreaking bestseller, The China Study, Startling Implications for Diet, Weight Loss, and Long-Term Health. And now, the new expanded edition, which you can get in the bookstore, along with my favorite book, is Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition. Dr. Campbell also has his final book signing tonight at 7:30, just to the right of the bookstore. So I encourage you to pick up his book if you haven't already, and get in line for the signing. With more than 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research funding, mostly by the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Campbell has authored well over 300 research papers on diet, nutrition, and health, derived from laboratory-based experimental research and large-scale human studies in China and the Philippines. He has been advisor to several government agencies, non-government organizations, as well as corporate bodies. He has held senior adjunct professorial positions at the University of Oxford in England and at Jiao Tong University in Shanghai. Please join me in giving a super holistic holiday sea welcome to Dr. T. Colin Campbell.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And thank you again for all of you for coming once again, and sharing with me some ideas, and I sharing with you some of my ideas on what this is all about. This whole question concerning Mislead, the role of the whole food plant-based diet in creating health. Now, in the first two, you can see that was the title, and these are sequenced. I meant for these lectures to be in serial form, that is one following the other, sort of all trending in a certain direction to make a message. And the message that I'm focused on is basically addressing the question of, rather oddly, reductionism versus holism. And so I gave a little on the history, as most of you know who are here, and then pointing out that reductionism research, focusing on one thing at a time, is very useful. It's really in many ways essential, but it's not the only thing. There's something beyond that. And so today, I want to sort of take what I talked about before, these reductionist ideas and other things, and suggest that we're moving toward the concept of holism, which I spell with a W, because we're talking about the whole thing. It's obvious, I think. And then I'm also suggesting that this idea of holism has long since been denied, and it's, in a way, it's re-emerging. It's re-emerging in reference, for one thing, to the research of the 1800s, where we talked about, or they talked about, constitutional nature of disease, which in a sense is holism, versus reductionism. Reductionism research was what actually gripped us ever since, unfortunately. And holism, or the constitutional nature of disease, kind of got distorted. So I wanted then today to talk about, how can we talk about the transition of holism, reductionism from holism? And of course, that's the best picture of holism, as you can see. And I want to, just before I go too far into this, I do want to just bring this question up. I know many of you know this. I have not been particularly happy with the science that's oftentimes used to describe veganism and vegetarianism. Two concepts that have emerged, as all of you know, for quite some years now. Very useful in a sense. It's taken us in the right sort of direction. But as far as the science is concerned, I'm talking about something quite different than veganism or vegetarianism. This is not vegetarianism, but as I said, 90% of vegetarians, apparently, from the latest data I've had, are still using dairy and eggs. And it's sort of defined as what vegetarianism is about. Veganism, in contrast, also, not in contrast, but in addition, is also not exactly what I'm talking about. because vegans still use, well, many of you know this, I'm sure, they're still using a lot of processed foods high in fat and refined carbohydrates. And so that too is not really supported by evidence. And so here's the best example, best kind of data to illustrate my point. And this was actually published in 2016 by a very reputable, distinguished group in London representing the European community, as a matter of fact. And what they had an opportunity to do in a large cohort of, I think it's 500,000 people, to compare vegetarianism and veganism, meat eaters, and so forth. And what they found was that the meat eaters, vegetarians, and veganism total fat was the same. Not going to surprise you, but it's very basically the same. And it's the nutrient composition that actually determines health effects. So you can see that vegetarianism and vegans are consuming about the same amount of fat as meat eaters. Now, it's true the average for some cohorts may be a little higher than 30%, but not much. The second thing, as far as sugar content is concerned, those three diets, if you want to call them diets, are also more or less the same. This is one of the reasons why vegetarian and vegan studies from time to time don't show results, or they show minimal results, and it's not particularly impressive. And so it's really having to do with this and the other nutrients that sort of run in parallel with these kind of changes. I'm putting over here on the right-hand side the whole food plant-based diet. It's kind of a target. That's all I'm just listing it as a target. Obviously, we can come back to that later, but clearly, the whole food plant-based diet, as far as whole foods are concerned, without the added fat, it's 10% fat, and that's plenty for the amount of fat that we need. Sugar content also can be down there too. And then, by the way, as far as fat is concerned, I distinguish between the fat in foods as opposed to the fat that's added. The fat in foods is not really what I'm talking about, and fat is the added fat that makes a difference. Again, I'll come back to that a little bit later, because the added fat, oils, if you will, that sort of thing, they oftentimes are made up of the kind of oils that are, we say, pro-inflammatory. And so I'm just suggesting that as a reference point. Obviously, I'm not talking about this either. I was in on that early on. I will mention in just a moment. But let me get into that subject and to give you some reference point for why I'm talking about the idea that this is not sort of nutrient supplements, if you will. In 1981, which was right at the time that I was on a National Academy of Science panel charged with recommending something about diet, nutrition, cancer. I mentioned it before. At that time, this came out, which actually caught my attention and kind of started to steer me in a certain direction. Namely, if you look at the cancer incidence, lung cancer incidence, with respect to smoking, and with respect to all things beta-carotene, this is the publication, this is what they got. That is to say, if you look along this axis here, the greater the consumption of cigarettes, the higher the lung cancer incidence. Very clear. I mean, that's been obviously established, and it's very clear in that case. But then along this axis here, if you compare lung cancer incidence versus the so-called carotene index, that's the amount of beta-carotene in the blood. Here is the lowest level of carotene, and on up to there. What you can see is that when somebody is smoking heavily and having the lowest intake of beta-carotene, the risk of getting lung cancer is substantial. This is a pretty big study, by the way, very prominent study at the time. It was never really discussed. And so as people had more beta-carotene in the blood coming from the food, clearly, right? They actually were able to reduce the risk of lung cancer almost to zero. I got caught up and got ensnared in that discussion at the time a bit because I thought this was very exciting. I thought this was very exciting in reference to a slide I'm going to show you next. But for one thing, here beta-carotene was a really key factor in getting lung cancer. And I was quoted someplace in the newspaper, I don't know where it was. I had just returned from China at the time. It was about 5 of us, I think, on that team, one of the first teams in China. One of the members of that group, a gentleman from Switzerland, a scientist who was very busy with his colleagues in trying to bring the smoking problem to the attention of the public. He saw what I said. Oh, look at this, beta-carotene is associated with less cancer. He said, don't do that, don't do that. Because if you're trying to, advise the public not to consume, not to use cigarette smoking, and we don't want to tell them that they can just eat carrots and basically all the smoking they want to do. It was a reasonable point, I understood. But it really raised the question. Smoking occurs not just because of smoking. I mean, lung cancer occurs not just because of smoking, but also occurs because of our diet. That's a fairly major fact. In 1981, when I'm not quite where I am now, I really thought that was kind of interesting. That somehow nutrition was so powerful that could easily bring under control something as hazardous as lung cancer that's derived from smoking. So that was one thing. And the beta-carotene is as I think many of you know, is the pre-formed, it's the pro-vitamin A kind of thing. It was a very popular nutrient in those days for discussion. And so the huge beta-carotene effect, that dose-response relationship is impressive. I think most of you will know what I'm talking about. That really makes this information really quite valid. And, okay, I said that. The raw beta-carotene was actually acting like a cancer promoter. It really, it's just very exciting information, to say the least. There also was another thing, too, 10 years before that, in 1971, suggesting that when people quit smoking, and keep in mind that Surgeon General's report on smoking came out in 1964. That was the official document. So this is just 7 years later. And from that database that they had available at the time, it turns out that when you stop smoking, your risk of getting lung cancer gradually goes down, and it takes about 10 years. There's different figures, but the data was showing that if you quit smoking, it takes, I'm going to say now, 5 to 10 years time before you come back down to the baseline. And one of the best ways to do that is consume a diet high in beta-carotene, for starters. But this right here, this chart, this information suggested to me that it wasn't just about lung cancer. What they found in this information in that study, all these diseases, look at stroke, coronary heart disease, bronchitis, liver cirrhosis, and so forth, in addition to some cancers. When you stop smoking, you'd otherwise get these when you're smoking, but of course they're all reduced. What that said to me was this effect of beta-carotene, if you want to call it that, really had a rather broad, possibly a very broad effect on various diseases. Okay, that was the information that was discussed in the scientific community. So the next, and there were about 20 other studies showing that smokers who had more beta-carotene in their blood had a less risk of heart disease, lung cancer. So the decision was made, at NIH actually, in this country, why don't we do a study and take some smokers and then give them beta-carotene. The beta-carotene is on the front pages of the newspapers and everything. Let's do a study and give beta-carotene to the smokers to see what effect it might have. It was a big study that was started, a study that was a joint study between the United States and Finland. It was intended to be maybe 8 years long. As I say, a rather large study of male smokers. The food beta-carotene, and they had to stop the study early, by the way. I'll jump to that in a second, you'll see why. The food beta-carotene in the blood, that stands up in the blood, the higher the beta-carotene consumption, there was a significant reduction in lung cancer risk, consistent with what was later reported 10 years after that. The supplement beta-carotene did not decrease lung cancer. The supplement beta-carotene actually increased lung cancer. That was a shocker. That was a horrible shocker for many people. The furor that surrounded that was incredible. At that time, I was asked to be the key witness for the National Academy of Science in a lawsuit brought by the U.S. government through the Federal Trade Commission, was brought by the U.S. government against those in the nutrient supplement industry at that time, just beginning, because they wanted to use it. They wanted to put beta-carotene pills and all kinds of other things. So I spent 3 years actually in the docket as the principal critic of the claims that were being made by those would-be nutrient supplement producers at the time. So I get into it up to here, really sort of watching the emerging evidence on the use of nutrient supplements, and I've followed it ever since because I've been particularly interested. The Federal Trade Commission, by the way, in their decision 3 years after that sort of testimony, made a claim that, you can't make, the industries who want to make nutrient supplements cannot make outrageous claims. They had to be within bounds, was the subject of that lawsuit, actually. And so I have to tell you, it had no effect on the industry. The industry went ahead and just started producing supplements anyhow. It's just the way it was. They didn't produce beta-carotene because by that time it was pretty obvious that that was not a very good idea for PR reasons. There were a number of studies that were then done in the late 80s and early 90s and on into the 2000s actually on using different nutrient supplements to prevent something. Nutrient supplements sound like they're good. I mean, vitamin E is good, right? Everybody assumes that's an antioxidant. And calcium and vitamin D, too, are good for supplementation. Yet these kind of results were coming up from time to time, like weeds in the garden. They're really quite significant. And now there's been quite a number of studies showing when we use nutrient supplements as a means to get health, unfortunately, we see too many examples of it doing exactly the opposite. So here's what it really said in a sort of scientific sense. The nutrients in the food are working as they should because of all the other stuff in the food that's working with it. When you take it out and you put it in a pill, if you will, all bets are off. And so the whole nutrient supplement industry has kind of ignored that, and I don't know what the latest figures are, but apparently we're spending over $30 billion a year taking nutrient supplements because, and then the inference being made is that, oh, eat what you want, just take our supplements. And of course it's wrong, so I do want to make a point of that because I'm not talking in this message about the nutrients and nutrient supplements. It's a very different kettle of fish, as they say. Now, incidentally, when I talk about nutrient supplements, I'm leaving out of that discussion herbs or dietary supplements of that sort. Having been in China as much as I had been, I actually got, the Chinese government gave to me and the organization I was with at the time, their golden collection of 2,500 herbs that they had gathered over centuries. And so I was here in this country, or in the United States, sort of attempting to understand something about herbal supplements. I found out they're not the same as nutrient supplements. Herbal supplements, as the Chinese have practiced in other societies over the time, oftentimes are whole foods dried down in one way or another, and they're plant-based. I mean, in China, watermelon is a herb, just for example. And so I began to gain a great deal of respect for the Chinese and other societies who had come across ideas about herbal supplements from time to time, showing what looked like to be means of treatment. So I was impressed. It was different from nutrient supplements. And then I got involved with the FDA, who wanted to know from me, we had some assays, how they might be able to regulate herbal supplements, because there was a growing interest in this country at the time. That turned out to be a loss because the Food and Drug Administration made regulations based on looking at individual things. In other words, they were looking at reductionist results. They were entrapped. They were entrapped in making regulations based on the assumption individual nutrients or whatever, had to be regulated, when in fact it didn't really work that way. So I'm just sort of sharing this with you because all of a sudden regulations and health effects and scientific results sort of get all kind of mixed up together, and we end up arguing a lot with each other. Here's one example of a vitamin C thing that a friend of mine did that was kind of interesting. A Chinese friend at Cornell, actually, his father had been a herbalist in China, and so he came to the United States to kind of sharing Chinese experience with American sort of kind of thing, and he did this. So I give credit to him for that. But this is basically what he found. If you take 100 grams of an apple, and you say, I wonder how much vitamin C is in that. So you take it to the lab and you analyze. That's what he did. He took 100 grams of apple, analyzed it for vitamin C, and he found 5.7 milligrams of vitamin C in that apple, that 100 grams of apple. So then, just to jump through a couple of steps here, that 5.7 milligrams, let's say, is equivalent to 5.7 units of vitamin C activity. When I say vitamin C activity, I'm talking about how vitamin C does things in the body. And there are some tests you could do that kind of thing. So that's the first thing. 100 grams of apple, analyze it, gets 5.7 milligrams of vitamin C to get the 5.7 units of vitamin C activity. Then he goes back and gets another 100 grams of apple. And he takes what is obviously 5.7 milligrams of vitamin C, and he tests it in the form of the apple. Gets 1,500 units. Another sort of alert. The vitamin C in the apple is vastly different in terms of its potency than it is in the pill, even though it's the same amount of vitamin C. We can talk, of course, about why that number is so high. It's not only because the vitamin C is working more effectively, we're kind of confident of that, but there's other compounds there too that's acting like vitamin C. There's a couple of different ways to look at that. But it just shows that all this business about measuring nutrients in food and stuff like that, I'll come to that point. It's all of a sudden come into question for me. You know, why do we want to pay so much attention and focus so much on exactly how much nutrient is in the food? So that was an eye-opening exercise. And by the way, we as a society are so enthralled, maybe is the right word. We're so almost immune from the whole idea that the individual nutrients on the labels of things mean something. We have, for example, this has been going on since 1943. There's a body at the National Academy of Science in Washington that determines with a new report every 5 years how much of each individual nutrient we need, how much should be recommended. That's the recommended dietary allowance of all these vitamins and minerals and so forth and so on. And so they have, this is in reference to individual nutrients. This, in a sense, is reductionism. Sometimes the inference is that if we know exactly how much nutrient we have to consume, we're going to go get that food and make sure we get that kind of nutrient. It's really kind of silly. It doesn't make sense, but this kind of message is inferred to the value of food or nutrition in the context of individual nutrients and exactly how much it has. So we, as a society, we talk about this all the time. People ask me, how much of vitamin A do I really need? What if I took this, what about that? I can't answer those questions. They have no meaning because, but it's useful to know that, I guess, but I would almost discard the whole program, to be honest about it. Here's one on food labeling. We get quite excited about going to the store and buying food and looking on the label to see how much of this, that, and something else it has. I was actually on the labeling committee of the National Academy of Science in the early 90s that came up with this recommendation, so I was involved in this too at the time. And but this was the system. You decide what's going to be on the label. Can you put everything in there? No, that's not. You put some things on there. And so, you see individual nutrients listed. Now, some of that information is useful, I admit. If you see cholesterol on that label, as in this sample, that means there's a little bit of something in there of animal sources, because cholesterol is from animals. So it's kind of helpful in a way. Some people want to know how much salt is in it, of course. Those who have some sensitivity to salt, they want to know that, it's helpful. And then a lot of people want to know how much fat is in it, how much fat compared to calories, and so forth and so on. I don't want to denigrate the idea of using food labeling. It's helpful. It's helpful. But what I do want to say, don't get so caught up in looking at all those numbers on those charts, because they quite frankly don't mean much of anything. This reductionism again. See how this reduction ideas come into play? It's in our laboratory talking about using individual nutrients, then we recommend how much we should consume and how much, all that. So, it brings up another concept, nutrient density. Here's a term that's become somewhat popular, unfortunately, in my view. The nutrient density concept that people talk about is really misleading. It's very superficial science. It's not even real science in my view. Nutrient density sort of conceptually has some meaning. That is to say, if you have a food, so many calories in it, it's got more nutrients in it, with reference to calories. That sounds good. Sounds great, right? Well, here's the problem with it. Nutrient density idea arose 4 or 5, maybe 10 years ago or so. Unfortunately, the science is really terrible. The nutrient density concept, nutrient density, that was used back in the 50s, when I was a graduate in the early 60s. And in this case, in order to understand what nutrient density really means and how to value it, you have to know which nutrients are we talking about. And then you have to assign some value to each of those nutrients. Then you say, the value according to what? There's many different things they do. So this becomes a marketing scheme. This is not science. Even though conceptually it might make sense, it is simply not science. It's very super.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your kind attention, please? Mr. John Francis Feher, I repeat, Mr. John Francis Feher, and Mrs. Suzanne Michelle Feher, I repeat, Mrs. Suzanne Michelle Feher, are kindly requested to contact the Girls Service Desk from Deck 5 or to call 99. Thank you.
Thank you. So anyhow, nutrient density is a concept that's been taken out of the box, used to exploit the marketing of foods, and that's one of the main instruments. Whether people intend it or not, that's the way it has been used. I can name some food companies who have used it that way, and really, they can make any food, depending on which nutrients they put in the index, and which value they give to individual nutrients. They can make any food look better than another food, appropriate or not. It's really a silly exercise. And so I've been quite exercised about this for at least 10 years and trying to tell some of my colleagues about that. I want to make it clear that there's a problem. But food labeling, come back to food labeling. Those individual numbers, don't fixate on those actual numbers in order to make a purchase, necessarily. That's getting too out of sorts. So what I guess I'd suggest to you, all of this is reductionist thought, research, this and that. But there's questions, and I'm sort of come up with some questions here that really question the whole practice of focusing on individual nutrition. I want to just change the scene a little bit, come to a similar conclusion. Namely, we consume food, obviously, and the food has nutrients in it. And here's some steps. When we consume the food, the nutrients in the food, here's what they go through more or less. They're digested, they're absorbed, they're transported in the blood, they eventually end up in the cells, then they function. Someplace in the cells, they do this and that or something else. Finally, they self-administrate. All those are really significant steps, and it might add some more in there, but in any case, the point I want to make is all these steps. And so what we would like to know, we can know how much nutrient we consume at a moment in time. And then we sort of decide, is that the right amount? If we even want to know what that number is, we generally think of it in reference to function. We consume this much to get this function. So that's the steps that you have to go through to think about that idea. It turns out, going from one stage to the next it varies by at least 20%.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please. Mr. John Francis Fear, I repeat, John Francis Fear, and Mrs. Susan Michelle Fear, I repeat, Susan Michelle Fear, are requested to contact the guest service desk on deck 5 or to call 99. Thank you.
So each of these nutrients, as they're going through from step to step, is varying. There's no way under the sun that even if we knew exactly how much is here, or we're valuing it in some fashion, we have no idea of how that relates really to function, which is where it is. So we're really vastly overrating the amount consumed here. We're really overrating our knowledge by sort of making that kind of presumption. Because it turns out, we can not only can we not know how much is actually functioning in the real site, based on what we're consuming, if we were able to do that, let's say we were able to do that, we could determine exactly how much, again, but let's just say for the sake of argument, we know how much is actually going through each step. The moment we know that, the next nanosecond is going to be different. So it makes no difference if we do it. We can't do it, but it's no difference if we do it anyhow. That's just for one nutrient. To make it a little more complex, imagine. Let's say we could do all those numbers and we see it, okay, well, that. Now we've built in another nutrient. All bets are off. So whatever we may have wanted or thought we could do just in that exercise, it means nothing. What we do know is there's a high degree of variability occurring all the time. And just imagine the tens, hundreds of thousands of chemicals in food that we could call nutrients. It's not 30 or 40. It's a very large number. So all of a sudden now we're in a new world, new reality. Rather than think about each individual nutrient doing this, that, or something else, and putting great value on it, and making decisions based on it in very sundry ways, it really has, I mean, all of that exercise which we all are caught up in, for the most part, in the corporate world as well as in the academic world, I should say, and medical world, it really is kind of meaningless for the most part. So there's got to be something different here. As you can see, this is a cell. And I want to share with you what, to really elaborate on this point a little more. The cell, there are between 10 to 100 trillion cells in our body. Can you think of that number? Does that have any meaning to you? I mean, that's far beyond our channel. We just can't even think of that. We just know there's a lot. And that each cell is like a universe. There are various parts to it, various events going on, and lots of reactions, unlimited numbers of reactions. That cell is so alive, but it's our basic unit to keep us alive and do the things that it wants to do. So each cell, not visible to the naked eye, can easily sit on a pinhead. So here we got 10 to 100 trillion cells of activity of the business end of our ideas. We can't even see them. I can't see one at a time. But yet, each one is like the universe, with all the complexity we associate with a macro universe out there, and the number of events. It's really quite amazing. Like you say, it's like each cell is like a micro-universe. And here's something else too. Of those trillions of cells in our body, do you know they communicate with each other? Sitting next to each other, they communicate with each other that way. But they also communicate in vast distances, largely vast distances across the body, in the form of almost instant production of, let's say, some hormones that may transmit a message here to there, however that happens. We got neurological function, nerves here, going there, telling something there. So our body is so dynamic, both in reference to time, in reference to the numbers of events that are occurring, the number of entities that are participating in those events, and the complexity that's associated with that. I mean, we'll never, ever understand that full complexity. We're not even close. All we have to know is enormously complex, all operating together like that. So here's one more picture of that. This all sort of came together. for me to share it with you, because all of a sudden, lessons from the past as well as lessons from the present now make quite a story, I think. Here is a list, here's a pathway of how a chemical gets metabolized. You know, you consume things, of course, nutrients and so forth and so on. How many of you have heard of the Krebs cycle? You know, lots of quite familiar. Okay, there's the Krebs cycle. There's some of the pathway that goes to the Krebs cycle called glycolysis. And at the top of that, that first entry up there is a sugar molecule that's been made by photosynthesis. In other words, the cell is sitting there in the plants, capturing the energy and turning into chemical bonds that then make up sugar. So we're capturing the energy from the sun, putting it in the form of chemicals that then we metabolize, you know, step by step by step, kind of picking off a little energy here and there, you know, doing some other things. And so it's a very exciting thing. Many years ago, I was teaching, you know, biochemistry, actually to biochemistry students. Now, gosh, it's 50 years ago, I guess. And we, at that time, in the scientific community, I thought it was very exciting. Students thought, wow, this is great. Because we would learn each step along the way, and an enzyme sits at each step and controls the rate at which it goes from here to there. So you got all these enzymes and all these reactions. So it was kind of building up, and we learned all about, as many of you may know, we learned all about glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and you go this way and that way. And it was a kind of a contest between those of us in the laboratory to get the latest chart, because something new was being added. And so from time to time, it was fun, to say the least. But then after a while, it became that. You can't see that, and you're not intended to see it, because now this is like 30 years ago. So that was published. And this is only a tiny, tiny dot on the complexity of all the rest is going on in the cell. So here's what we have. We got these trillions of cells. Each cluster of cells doing something different. Here we got a cluster of cells making insulin. Here we got a cluster of cells over here stimulating the nerves coming up the eye so we can see. Here's another cells over here that might do something different. All these cells in the body started with the same fundamental DNA from which everything arises. But they're each deciding to do something different. They work together. They communicate, they work together. And they keep reminding, you know, how many there are, how small this is, how vast this is in time. So, now, you see that. In science, the last 200 years or so, 150 at least, the idea arose, if you get this disease, we'd like to know which one of those reactions might we stop. Why are we getting the disease? Is that the mechanism? That's what I call mechanism. Is that the one that we want to block? If we can decide which one that's really key, then we got a solution. We'll give a chemical someplace and turn it into a drug. This is the fundamental basis for the entire pharmaceutical industry. It's this presumption that somehow, in this complexity of events, that somehow we can find the reaction that we don't want to be operating the way it does, and we'll get a chemical put there. So we have a drug. The drug, by the way, is a foreign compound. It's not native to the body. So that's another issue. So we make a drug. So in this particular case, let's say we make a drug to do that. And the first question you can ask, how can one reaction tell all without side effects? When I say side effects, all drugs have side effects. So highly targeted, they come in, they're supposed to push their way around, get to that site that we want to stop. And then we're supposed to expect that not to have side effects. As it traverses its way through this maze, it kind of intercepts all these other reactions nearby. So all drugs have side effects, unpleasant in many cases, maybe even lethal. But that is the basis for the drug industry. It's a presumption that I can hardly imagine that the basis for the pharmaceutical industry is so myopic, is the word I like to use, because we think, unfortunately, There's just one thing hitting that. That's called the best of science in some areas. It's not in my mind, but that's all starts because we assume, in a reductionist sense, that one thing comes in and does all these wonderful things. That's the drug protocol. That's what we now have admitted, in a sense, as a society. This is the best way to acquire health. Do with what you want to do. We'll find a drug and we'll get that. In using that concept. However, the nutrition protocol, which is what whole food plant-based diets, now we're discovering what it is, because I believe so. The nutrition protocol, in that case, all these chemicals in that food, all different kinds of foods, we're consuming them and they're all there. And somebody is controlling and picking out which to do what. And so what happens, we can say the nutrition protocol, imagine, involves hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of reactions. And when you eat the right food, the right thing is doing the right thing. Where it goes to, there's no side effects. The distinction between drug therapy and nutrition therapy is just like one idea is on one side of the universe, the other is on the other side of the universe. We chose the wrong one. We chose the wrong one. It's not to say that there are some drugs that are useful, at least in the short run. I know that. If we've got pain, some drugs can be used. For that purpose, there's a few we can use in the short term, but use them advisedly. They're not meant to be lifestyle instruments. It's just simple, that simple. But we have made them that way. We keep arguing all the time on the Affordable Care Act, that silly debate that we had, if you could call it a debate. You know, you're making drugs more affordable. You know, have more drugs. I mean, it really is. It's so mindless what we do. So that's where I arrived at this idea of holism. With all that evidence, I see our eating food, as long as we're eating generally the right kind of food, that's plant-based, that's whole, and we don't add back a lot of oil and salt, because that's only a fragment of the total food. That causes problems. That's what we can expect to see. But when we're eating the right food, the body is looking at this and decides on its own grounds which of those things it's going to choose and how much it's going to get absorbed and how much it's going to send here, how much send there. It's an amazing concept. I mean, you have to think about it for a while to really get to the point where you can realize we're talking about something that's really quite amazing. When we do it that way, that's why we get the results we get with a whole food plant-based diet. And we can't get that same result from drugs. Nor can we get it from eating the wrong kind of food. Animal food, for example. Or some of the highly processed foods. We can't get that result. So here's holistic nutrition. Multiple nutrients, multiple mechanisms, multiple disease reversal, multiple health improvements. That's a whole food plant-based diet, mind you. No other so-called diet can come close to that. It really is quite feeble in that imagination. This is a highly interactive, integrated, holistic system with one caveat, without making animal protein a cult. You already know enough about animal protein. It creates an enormous variety of problems. It really does. And also, we eat it because somehow in history, we came to believe that we had to eat animals. And then when protein was discovered in animal food, that's it. Protein became of prime importance, as they said in the early days. So we go forward for the next 150 years. Most of us think, we gotta have some protein. Where am I going to get my protein from? That kind of thing. That distorts the rest of the diet. More animal food in the diet, we decrease the consumption of the foods we should be eating. So the whole notion of animal protein being the nutrient, sort of the shining light for us, has really distorted our thinking in very gross ways. Now, that's nutrition. There's a point I think is terribly important. Medicine has been constructed as a so-called science. It's been constructed as a practice. based on reductionist thinking. That is to say, we see a problem. We think there's one cause here, there's one mechanism here, there's a drug to take care of it, and that's so it goes. And so all the medical schools teach that. That's the philosophy they underwrite their program with, the reductionist philosophy, take it one thing at a time. So reductionist medicine is not holistic nutrition. One disease, one cause, one mechanism, one drug treatment, and the drug they use a foreign chemical, that's another issue. We're taking something from someplace else, putting it in our bodies. We might get some effective look interesting for a while, but the body deals with that foreign body to get rid of it. So that's another whole side story that's important to get by side effects. This is why, and here's a key point I want to make. This is why holistic nutrition is not taught in reductionist medical schools. Throughout the history of medical schools, in our philosophy of medicine, we lived with this reductionist idea, the wrong message from the past. The wrong message from the past. So we get all these people trained to expect to be able to tell you exactly which this does what. That's really why the word it's founded on. That's what practice medicine is founded on. Somebody comes along and says nutrition to a medical school, which I've been doing as best I can. Somehow their first reaction is, wait, what are you talking about? You get comments like, which nutrient? Which one of the things in the food is really causing this problem? I said, there's none. The whole discussion just falls apart pretty quickly. Because we got two different philosophies. Two vastly different philosophies. One cannot judge the other. Well, reductionist philosophy cannot be used to judge the other, which is holistic, unless people have a somewhat open mind to really realize what it's all about. So this is why nutrition is not taught in reductionist medical schools. It's not even a medical specialty. You know, we have about 130 medical specialties, and the doctors in the room will know this. We have about 100. What is a medical specialty? It's like surgery, anesthesia. It's all these different things. And that's the way doctors are compensated in part for, looking at the patient, putting some number down, according to some specialties. I'm being a little bit superficial, but that's the way it is. So the medical specialties, we got 130, one count I have, that the Medicare program uses in their program. I think it's 130 or 134 something. Do you know that not one medical specialty is called nutrition? So here we have a situation. Medical schools are not teaching nutrition because you can't judge it, they don't understand it. It can do far better than what they're doing, first. And secondly, we don't have a mechanism for doctors to get compensated for offering nutrition services. So the whole concept of nutrition is thrown out to the wind, let alone plant-based nutrition. I talk about nutrition in general, but specifically about the plant-based nutrition. So it gets lost in the weeds. Medical schools have no way of really understanding hardly what I'm talking about. And there's at NIH there's 28 institutes, one for cancer, one for heart disease. All of my research is funded, except for a little bit from the American Cancer Society, was funded by NIH. So I got lucky because my ideas for exploring that at the time, they thought, as I look back, that I was working toward finding a mechanism for the way nutrients work. It might give rise to a supplement, or finally after I became aware and they became aware, we parted ways in a sense. They closed my lab. You want to talk about it, but so NIH doesn't have, now of the 28 institutes, there's not one called Institute of Nutrition. Anyhow, so here's medicine, here's nutrition. Nutrition can do far more than what all the pills and procedures combine. It's that simple. In terms of treatment, preventing disease, and so forth. Reductionist medicine, I'll read this. This is also why professionals in clinical practice, medical research, and health administration fail to understand and embrace nutrition as a serious medical science. Nutrition is the premier medical science, but it doesn't even have a place at the table of 130 specialties. That's how far afield we are in reference to the professionals that we look to give us information. Now, I have a great deal of admiration, of course, for physicians, practicing physicians. They went to school, great enthusiasm for helping people and so forth and so on. And I feel sorry that somehow they didn't get this. So I have actually, in the last 3 or 4 years, now been starting to speak to more medical schools. I've spoken to at least 130 medical schools in the last few years. And what I find is that at first, when I was doing this, they didn't ask any questions. I thought, oh, geez, I screwed up. Somehow, something wasn't working. That was my first sort of reaction. And then maybe a year or two later, the reaction I was getting from some was anger. Because all of a sudden they say, you're telling us, oh yeah, we didn't take any nutrition courses. And they're getting angry that they went to school to help people and they weren't given the tools to help the people. And then they learn too, they can't get reimbursed for doing anything, so forget it. So, and any doctors in here who want to do this kind of thing, you'll know that you tend to spend your time in helping your patients, doing this kind of, providing this kind of information. The present system, okay, now I want to take it down to some real problems with it. So I want to bring it down to some real issues to illustrate how far afield we are. The present system, based on reductionist practice of medicine, doing research and all that, last year, when the Obama administration was just leaving office, they appropriated some new money for new, exciting and new medical advances in the future. That's what was in all the newspapers. Medicine is now a new age. We're going to go out here and we're doing this and that. Immunotherapy for cancer, for example, and those kind of claims that are being made. So the Obama administration gave $4.8 billion new money for NIH, just it's kind of from the kitty. It was extra available at that time. That was premised on this concept we call Precision Medicine Initiative. Got in newspapers across the country. You may have seen it, you may have recalled it, I don't know. But it sounds good. Precision Medicine Initiative. At best, I mean, if that's what that says. We got some new ways of using reductionist medicine, which means expanding the horizon so we can use more drugs. That's really where it intended to go, and associated with that, the immunotherapy model that's been also touted is, letting the body do its thing the way it wants to do it. It sounds good, but in reality, they're still looking at individual components of the immunotherapy system to promote or repress or whatever the desire happens to be. There's sort of, in a sense, with this new venture, admitting complexity but embracing still what they call targeted drug therapy. That's the sort of the core of this business. It includes immunotherapy, functional medicine, and they even, the people in reductionist medicine, when they even think about nutrition, they change the word nutrient into something else. They call it a nutraceutical. This happened about 10 years ago or something like that. At the same time, they're talking about using nutrients to chemoprevent disease. In other words, they're focused on the chemical in question. It's different from what we're talking about here. And here's something, what does the whole lot mean? Let's put some dollars and cents on this. On chemotherapy, which is the area that I've been most familiar with for the longest period of time, it's in cancer research, the average cost of developing a new cytotoxic chemotherapy agent for cancer, I have the safest figure, 1.3 to 1.8 billion. In reality, if you put opportunity cost as a part of that equation, it turns out to be $2.5 billion. The drug industry says it's going to cost them $2.5 billion to develop a new chemotherapy drug for cancer patients. $2.5 billion. And so how are these chemotherapy agents working? We could look back and have a look and see what's going on. Here's a study that came out half a dozen years ago from Australia and the United States, joint study. What they did, they accessed the records on 22 different cancer types. And they asked the question, how well are the chemotherapy agents working for those different cancer types, protocols, if you will. And they found that of all these things since about 1970, all these chemotherapy agents are now being used. It increases 5-year survival by only 2.1%. So here we're spending $2.5 billion, depending on how you do the arithmetic, but $2.5 billion, and getting a return for like this, 2.1%. In reality, some would suggest the protocol, in fact, doing nothing would be better than that. So, and it really troubles me because cancer patients obviously are vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. They've been diagnosed, they go to the doctor says do this, this, and this, and they tend to do it. And the model that's being used, they're subjected to either surgery, if that's possible, chemotherapy, which doesn't work, or radiotherapy, essentially the same story. Yes, we have some evidence that occasionally some of these chemotherapy agents can extend life a few months here and there, maybe a year or two. And people like to have, certainly have that, but at what cost? The side effects from chemotherapy are just hardly worth it, especially when you realize, oh, I might get another year, but I'm going to be really sick at that time. So here's one place where the rubber hits the road. All this reductionist research, reduction philosophy nonsense occurs, while at the same time ignoring what nutrition can be. My son Tom was a physician at the medical school in Rochester. I have to say, we just got some money. I've been obviously interested in following up on this. You may be surprised to hear that the whole food plant-based diet has never been used as a means of treating cancer patients. Not formally, you hear stories about others trying from time to time, but it's not really been used in a sense of producing results that are credible, that are published in professional journals. It's not been done. So we've gotten the funding, and he's now starting his first study on metastatic breast cancer patients. Not directly using only a whole food plant-based diet, but using it as an adjuvant with the regular chemotherapy now being used. But if Mike believes that that'll morph into using a whole food plant-based diet to treat cancer patients. I really believe the theory in the opportunity. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We can't be sure when we do this kind of thing of research. You have to be prepared for bumping and bumps in the road and so forth. But I think that we're going to see some very exciting results. This comes in here. In the most recent round of talking about chemotherapy agents, the one that's most mentioned is some agents that might actually hit or kill, or promote natural killer cell activity. You may remember from the last lecture I was talking about natural killer cell activity. That's the thing that comes from the immune system. These cells come out and they destroy cancer cells. So now they want to figure out, put it that way, how they can actually find that mechanism, that pathway, so they can enhance natural killer cell activity. And it's being discussed as if it's a whole new idea. The future of medicine.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Just an announcement to let you know that due to a little bit of congestion, we are waiting for clearance from the local authorities, and we should be on our way shortly. Once again, it's a little bit congested, and we're waiting for local authorities to give us the proper clearance, and as soon as that happens, we will be on our way. This in any way will affect our arrival tomorrow. So no need to worry, just enjoy this beautiful afternoon.
I'm kind of glad, because when this thing starts moving, I'm scared. Get my talk in time. So, remember all those mechanisms I told you about that we uncovered with protein? The protein, animal protein, actually decreases that natural killer activity and all the other same time. Why would you want to make a drug to enhance natural killer activity? Are we going to make drugs for all the other things at the same time? And all the other mechanisms too I haven't listed here? It's weird. There's a word in pharmacy called polypill. And some people working toward that figured out a combination of pills to address this complexity. Combination of pills. And you're going to call it polypill. That's got to be so silly. This is so ridiculous. Not even close to what nutrition can do again. It's a core activity of the Precision Medicine Initiative. Now coming back to that was heart, that's cancer. I want to make a quick, give you a quick example of heart disease. How the Precision Medicine Initiative is going to ruin, and that's back to my chart. Okay, it showed that before. It turns out that this compound right there, acetyl-CoA, goes through a series of steps as it begins to form cholesterol. Oh, exciting. This is something some years ago. And cholesterol, why do you like cholesterol, right? Cholesterol too high in the blood, let's get it down. Let's find a drug to block the making of cholesterol by our bodies. So research was done, and then finally got to a point where they thought they found a key reaction. That if you block that, then you can lower cholesterol. It happens, it really does. But keep in mind, that's one thing out of myriads of reactions along the way. So that led to, basically, let's put a block there. The key reaction was found, supposedly found. And so they made a chemical to block that status. Tens of billions of dollars a year to treat heart patients. And it doesn't work anywhere near like what Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Ornish have shown. Not even close. But this is where the vast number of people who have a heart problem, they go to the doctor, and that's one of the things they want, that and stents for the short-term alleviation of pain from time to time. So the problem with, this is just one example of many. This is heart disease. I showed you one for cancer. There were some, each of which involves huge amounts of money. I put that there as a reminder. So my hypothesis is nutrition provided by a diet of full plant-based foods simultaneously establishes what we call in science homeostasis. Homeostasis, everything is coming in equilibrium. And the body has this beautiful way of always trying to create, this balance. It's really beautiful. Everything, health is optimized. So you still got, I hope you can sit with me here just a little longer. Still got some time. I'm just listing here 12, I don't know what to call them, 12 suggestions or something. I'm kind of inclined to want to put these on a card or something and drop them from an airplane. But here's some thoughts that for me make sense. Ideal nutrition is provided only by whole food, plant-based diet and lifestyle without added fat and refined carbohydrates. That's a broad statement, fairly accurate. I think it's just the way to go. Whole food plant-based nutrition prevents future disease, but most importantly, it treats disease. That's a really exciting concept. Going on this diet is not only for the purpose of preventing future problems, but actually used to treat existing problems. I find that really an exciting concept. Whole food plant-based nutrition is the aggregate effect of countless nutrients, where whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Aristotle said that so long ago. And that's a real sound truism. Whole food plant-based nutrition is holistic, not reductionist, okay? Some more things. The nutritional response, whole food plant-based nutrition, is exceptionally broad in its effects. That's a really exciting concept. And that stands in opposition to the traditional assumptions that we need a drug for each one individual thing. It creates rapid response within days to weeks. Many of you know that. You go on this, you see the benefits so fast. Again, it's a very exciting concept as far as health is concerned and medical treatment. It leads to the adaptation. And one of the interesting things is, some people, you know them, we all know them, some friends and all, they're going to try this. I can't put up with it quick. They find it so hard to continue. One of the things that I find is attractive to tell these folks is that when you're eating the whole food plant-based diet, you're staying with it, just a little willpower. in a month or so, your preferences for food begin to change. And the reason for that is because we're addicted to the old diet, many people, and that means fat and sugar and salt. And like any other addiction, it takes a while to get past it. So give yourselves a month or so. Tell your friends you might want to try this. Don't give up. Do it a month, maybe two, something like. You'll begin to see your preferences for food change. Okay, it's effective, and food is effective, but supplemental nutrients in the form of nutrition, that's not the way to go. Here's another one. Nutrients function not by one, but by multiple mechanisms. Some of these sound a little bit like each other. It upregulates good genes and downregulates bad genes. This kind of nutrition is much less confusing. This vast confusion we have out there. Everybody's had their ideas, they'll tell you this, that, and everything else. A lot of that stuff is opinion. It's not based on science. I'm very careful how I say this, but I've got friends who, we all do it, I guess, but, if we're going to work with reduction details, then we can find whatever detail we want to use to treat this, that, or something else, and somebody else finds a different one. Then we argue, and people say, oh, you have to take DHA, or, instead of this or that, and so we end up with this argument. It's in the papers, and everybody's going, what in the world's going on? I heard it so many different ways. This, in fact, reduces confusion. Just eat the food. Just eat the whole plant of foods. And don't make that interestingly, whole food plant-based nutrition minimizes the noxious effects of toxic agents. Remember the one I showed you, smoking? There's that nasty stuff in smoke, there's toxic chemicals. Even then, the nutrition was used. It has this amazing ability. And even in our studies, we're using carcinogen as the most potent carcinogen on the face of the earth. And just changing nutrition rules, the protein intake, and controlling it. So that's what I mean by this. It has this amazing ability. And then the last four, I think, it minimizes environmental problems. That's a biggie. That is a biggie. And we're going to have to learn more about that, get the word out there. We can't afford that problem. Also, nutrition promotes the social welfare for all sentient beings. Animals, people, you have it. That's where we can make progress, using this kind of food. It minimizes healthcare costs, which are outlandish. And it basically, it's for the future, what we needed for the future as it was during the millennia past. I think Hippocrates and Aristotle and some of those folks and Pythagoras, they were talking about this kind of thing. Because they didn't know all those details, fortunately. But they knew what the outcome was, and they were talking about a way for food, whole food to work the way it does. Summary, holistic nutrition involves, okay, I already said that, I think I'm repeating myself. Infinitely complex, changing within nanoseconds of time. That's the dynamic that we're talking about here. Finally, it's a constitutional advantage. We know from history that, but it got, that constitutional effect got lost. We chose the wrong path. Institutions adopted the wrong model. So we have to now suffer the consequences. And that's what's happening. That's why our medical system today and our health of our entire nation is so compromised. Because we took the wrong path. We didn't understand nutrition. We don't even teach it. We don't do anything with it. I'm going to suggest this idea is the equivalent. The biological theory of relativity. That's what Einstein said on the physics. Mathematics, he did. I think this is the same concept. When we think of it this way, you have to think about more of it. Really convinced this is the equivalent of the biological theory of relativity. That's the problem. And one more thing. The holism idea, I'm having friends and some family and so forth, this idea of holism is so beautiful. Because when you think about cells being able to work their magnanimous ways, and they work together, and you start thinking organs work together too, then who's at the control? Who's doing all that? You get it's food. You put the food in there, you get it the right way. The body can decide how to do that. It manages that complexity. That's what nature does. imagine the question, and then you say, well, why don't we humans relate to each other the same way? Why don't we have societies sort of relate to each other the same way? The holistic concept began to take on really interesting dimensions and meanings. And so, my older son, Blondie, said something that he just thought, I hasn't put back the blame. Whoops, sorry about that. Why did that get off? It's annoying. Oh, my thing said I'm not hooked up to the Wi-Fi. I'm up here. What? Is there somebody in the back of the room? Oh, gosh. Annoying. Okay. It's a fact of life. Let me just bring to your attention, I'm taking the liberty of sounding something sort of self-serving, but it's not meant to be. My son is going to be here, arriving sometime today. He's the one who's addressing our plant pyramidation, which was shown here too a couple of years ago, the forerunner. He's scheduled to speak on Saturday, I think it is, yeah, between 4 and 5:30. He's from economics and government, that's his favorite area. Trying to create something that's practical. You know, we can, all of us can work together. And so he's given that. I just want to bring it to your attention that that's where, for me, for him, and for others like this, we've got to figure out a way to stop the system, get off the boat, almost literally. Let's take a new course. Thank you very much.